Knowing when it is time to leave a church can be just as difficult as knowing when it's time to leave a relationship, particularly when you have invested time and money and developed all sorts of meaningful relationships. And maybe you've even served in ministry or in a leadership capacity of some sort, and you're starting to see certain things that are going on at that church that are making you wonder whether you should leave or whether you should stay. And so in this video, I want to give you 6 things that I really want you to consider if you're trying to figure out whether you should stay at a church or whether you should leave. Reason number 1 is when you disagree with the vision. Now, the word division actually means 2 visions. You put the prefix di in front of vision, it means 2 visions. And so that's basically what happens when you start disagreeing with the vision or the visionary, is that you start creating division in the church, which the New Testament has a lot to say about creating divisions. But we're going to take a look at an Old Testament passage that really talks about the heart of God and how God truly feels whenever there is division and rebellion in the leadership. Now, to provide a little bit of context, Moses and the nation of Israel were out in the wilderness, and Moses is the God-ordained leader. And then there's some people who are basically saying, hey, Moses, you're not the only leader. God speaks to us just like he speaks to you. So let's pick up the story in Numbers 16, verse 1. It says here, one day Korah, son of Izhar, a descendant of Kohath, son of Levi, conspired with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, from the tribe of Reuben. So the first thing that we notice here is that when you have disagreements with the leadership or the vision, it doesn't just oftentimes stop with you. Most of the time, we gather around other people and we try to persuade them to see our side because, after all, we have the right perspective and the church leadership does not. And this is how the divisions actually get started. Now let's keep reading. It says here, they incited a rebellion against Moses, along with 250 other leaders of the community. Wow. All prominent members of the assembly. So the next thing I want you to notice here is how quickly rebellion begins to spread. Once you start forming these private allegiances, and you start telling people, hey, this is how I feel about the church. Oh yeah, the pastor should have did this. Oh, did you hear this person's, the way he preached on Sunday? Or, oh, do you notice what they're doing with the money here? Or this, that, and the other. And this type of stuff starts to spread very, very quickly to the point where even church leaders can actually start to believe some of the things that the people who are disgruntled are actually saying. But now I want you to notice how God responded to this type of rebellion. In verse 3, it says, they came together against Moses and Aaron and told them, you have gone too far. Everyone in this entire community is holy, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the Lord's assembly? So now I want you to notice what is behind their rebellion. They feel like, you know what, with all due respect, we don't want to submit to you. We don't respect your authority. God speaks to us just like he speaks to you. And so therefore, we should have some say in how things are done and not just you. And so whenever you start feeling that way, first and foremost, you need to check your own heart and your own motives as to why you may be feeling this way. Is it an issue where you're not able to come up under any sort of authority in your life? Or is it genuinely the fact that there's something about the vision of this particular church that you strongly disagree with? If it is the latter, then my friend, that very well may be a good time for you to leave the church, because if you do not, you're going to end up slandering, gossiping, maligning, creating division, and then also it's going to be very, very difficult for you to financially support this church because you don't trust that the church leadership is going to do with your money the way you want it to be done. Now, the second reason why you may want to consider leaving a church is when you strongly disagree with that church's doctrine. So if you believe that the church is teaching something that is strongly in error with regard to the scriptures, then it might be time to leave. Now, this could be a primary issue, something like, the Bible is not the final authority, or Jesus' divinity, or how somebody becomes saved, or something like that. Or it could very well be a secondary issue, like you don't agree that your church should have a woman pastor, or the baptism of the Spirit and how they're dealing with the issue of tongues and different things like that, or how the gifts of the Spirit are flowing in that church, or whatever. It could be either a primary issue or a secondary issue. But if these issues are literally causing you to where you're not able to truly enjoy and embrace and interact with the church services because you're so distracted between how you feel it should be done, or more importantly, the doctrine that you believe is being taught that's false, then it very well may be time for you to leave that church. Now, the third reason why you may want to consider leaving a church is when you are not able to use your spiritual gifts at that church. Listen, God has created the church, and one of the reasons why is that He wants all of us to be able to use the God-given gifts that He has given us. And the easiest place to do that is in the local church because there's so many opportunities to serve. But if there's an extended period of time where you just literally feel like you're being stonewalled, you feel like you're being blocked, you feel like you're not getting opportunities at all to use your gifts, and you're feeling stifled, and maybe these are gifts that you were using in other churches, and so that's a key right there, right? This isn't something that maybe you've been denied at every church you've gone to, because if that's the case, you may want to strongly consider whether this is a gift for you or not. But maybe these are gifts that you know have been proven. These are things that you have done. People have confirmed it. They've affirmed it in your life. And for whatever reason, at this church, you're just not getting those opportunities. It very well may be time for you to look for another church. The Bible says in Proverbs 18:16, a man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men. So if your gift is not making room for you for, once again, a very long, extended season in that church, then you might want to consider going to another church where you can actually be more active and use the gifts that you believe God has given you. Now, the fourth reason why you may want to consider leaving a church is because you have not been able to establish true, authentic, and genuine community at that church. But let me say this. The question I want to ask you is, how hard have you tried to actually create community at this church? Before you just jump ship and go to another church, let me ask you a series of questions. Are you involved in some sort of life group that is designed to foster and create community? When you go to church, do you just simply go and leave, or do you try to hang around afterwards and actually talk to people and get to know people? Are you involved in ministry? Because oftentimes, as you get more involved in serving, you meet other people who are like-minded, who have the same types of desires that you do, and as a result, you create community. Another question I would ask you is, do you attend any sort of events, any sort of conferences, whether it's a singles event, whether it's a marriage conference, whether it's a workshop or a Bible study or any of these things where you get to know people outside of the Sunday morning experience? And then the last thing I'll ask you is, have you asked the leadership about some of the best ways that you can form community at this church before you just say, hey, this isn't for me, I'm going to jump ship and go to another church? So if you've tried all these things, once again, for an extended period of time, and you're not able to establish the type of community that you want at this church, it might be time to leave the church. Now, the fifth reason why you may want to strongly consider leaving a church is if you see that church abusing their spiritual power. Now, this could either be something that you've experienced personally, or it's something that you have observed happening in the lives of other people. And this could be in a number of ways. It could be harassment, it could be sexual abuse, it could be physical abuse, it could be extreme levels of control and manipulation. It could be embarrassment. You could be humiliated. You could see other people getting embarrassed, called out, humiliated. There's a variety of ways. But when you see these things happening, these could be signs that the church is unhealthy, and that very well mean that it's time to go. The Bible says that spiritual leadership should look different than secular leadership. Matthew 20:25 says this, but Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. 1 Peter 5:2-3 also says this, Care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. Here it is again. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care, but lead them by your own good example. So when you start to see leadership abusing their power, then it very well may be time for you to go. Now, you got to make sure that you are not interpreting somebody checking you or somebody challenging you or somebody even disciplining you in some way as, oh, I'm being abused or I'm being harassed or they're abusing their power. No, make sure that it's a genuine misuse of power. And if that is the case, then it might be time for you to go. Now, the sixth and final reason that you may want to strongly consider leaving a church is when there is an issue of integrity, specifically as it relates to sin. So in other words, if you see that sin is going undealt with or undisciplined, particularly in the areas of leadership or even those who are following and they're going to church, right? And you're starting to see some things and it's like they're sweeping it under the rug. They're not dealing with it. You know, hey, this church leader was sleeping with this person's wife and you know what? They're still up there serving, still doing their thing. And you know what? No one seems to be addressing these things. That could be a sign of a bigger issue that you really want to pay attention to, which is the fact that this church lacks the ability to carry out basic church discipline. And why is that important? Paul tells us why in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. In this chapter, there was a man who was sleeping with his father's wife, and Paul was challenging them to deal with the issue and exercise church discipline. And it says right here, your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole batch of dough? So the idea here is, hey, if the church is willing to let this go without any real discipline or no consequences, then hey, we can all do it and we can all get away with it because after all, this leader did it and there were no consequences. So why would I expect there to be any consequences when I do it? Instead, Paul says this, clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new unleavened batch, as indeed you are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Okay, so because you've hung with me this far into the video, I've got a bonus tip for you as it relates to how you can leave the church well. Here's a few things. First and foremost, be sure that you don't leave the church, capital C, just because you leave a church, lower C, right? Don't just get so jaded because you've had a bad church experience that you leave the whole institution as a whole. Make sure that you are actively trying to find a different church. The second thing that I would say is that to make sure that you're establishing community in between your churches. So if you leave a church and it might be a year before you actually find a different church, try to make sure that you're finding some sort of godly community so that you can have that accountability in your life. The third thing that I'll say is resist the temptation to talk negatively about your church or your church leader whenever you leave, because once again, you're creating divisions and it's basically saying more about you and your Christian character than it is about that particular church. And then the last thing that I'm going to say is don't expect the next church that you go to be perfect. Listen, churches are made up of people, right? And people are imperfect, so that means that church is going to be imperfect. So make sure that your expectations are not so high that no church in the world is going to meet them. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some other things that you think, reasons why people should leave a church? Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know if there's any other thoughts that you have about this particular topic. Hey, I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.